This was the first thing that came to my mind when I heard that opinion about you, that you were an anti-Semite Jew, right? And I thought, oh my God, the professor is the son of Holocaust survivors. Of course, we can laugh right now, but it might be upsetting, I guess. It is very harmful to hear something like that about yourself.
I don't feel hurt. No, I don't feel hurt because I lived every day of my life growing up with the horrors of what happened to my parents. They never talked about it. If you were to ask, here are the pictures of the family, they hung on our wall at home. I remember it. We lived in a very tiny little apartment in an area called Borough Park, 1583 40th Street, not far from here. And we had a little living room. My father was a factory worker. We lived very modestly, very simply. So simple you would be very surprised. We really didn't have heat. We saved. Okay? And on the wall was that picture. That was my mother and father. And the reason we have those pictures is because my mother had a sister who lived in the United States, Aunt Sarah. And before the war, my mother's mother, who is that woman, sent pictures to her sister in the United States. And so those pictures were preserved. That was my mother's two sisters and her brother. And the pictures hung in the living room wall. We never asked any questions. There are no pictures of my father. No pictures of my father's family survived. We never asked any questions. They were like ghost pictures on the wall. So we knew never to ask. If you asked, what happened to the brother? What happened to the sister? What happened to the sister? What happened to the mother? What happened to the father? I was very close to my parents. I have no idea. No idea. We all knew you don't ask. Don't ask that question. So we had this ghostly presence in our home growing up. So when people say, you're a Jewish anti-Semite, it's so stupid to me. It's so stupid. It's so ignorant. It's so vulgar. It's so gross. Do you have any, could you even have a conception of a conception of a conception of what it means to grow up in a home where, as far as you know, your whole family ended up in gas chambers? You know? So I never, as I said, from the point of view of me and my personal dignity, I don't want to, and self-respect for what happened to my family, I don't want to make errors. I don't want to make errors in judgment. But what other people say, you grew up in Brooklyn and you're lecturing me? You're lecturing me? No. I find that it's just, it never registered with me. What registered with me was being faithful to the memory of my parents' suffering. That registered. And also getting it right. You know, what would my parents want me to say if I went to Poland? I have been offered many times to come to Poland. I turned it down, except the last time when the second the new edition of the book on the Holocaust industry, the publisher asked me to come, and I was planning to come, but then COVID hit. It happened just at the time of the COVID, and so the trip never happened. So I'd have to think very hard about what to say. I can be candid with you. My parents, they didn't hate Poles, they hated Germans. They despised Poles. Now you might think that you may not understand the difference, but there was the sense of superiority to Poles, whereas there was a sense of hatred for the Germans. My mother, I'll tell you, obviously you have a whole different perspective on the world than my parents did. My father actually worked in Gdansk. He worked in Gdansk in the 1970s. There was a refrigeration plant they were building in Gdansk. And my father knew refrigeration as a profession. So he was in Gdansk. He liked Poland. He liked the communist Poland. He did. If time allowed, I have other responsibilities, as do you. Oddly enough, my mother hated Poles. Hated. She attended Warsaw University. And it was 1937. And in the lecture hall, the Jews had to be in a corner, and they had to stand. And at the end of the lecture, the Polish fascists would come and beat them. Her memories were very negative of the Poles. However, we have to see the full picture. The full picture is my mother died of a terrible cancer. It ate up her whole face. It was all blood and boils. All blood and boils, like a science fiction movie. Her last two friends were Poles. There was a young Polish man in the neighborhood, used to come to the house. They would argue and argue and argue, and she would throw him out, and he would come back, and he was Polish. And then we needed a home attendant for her. Okay? And we looked and looked and looked. Finally, she found someone. Her name was Clara. Clara was Polish. And she was Polish Catholic. They got so close that my mother would call her sister. And the night before she died, my mother called my brother in Chicago and said, make sure, to take care of Clara. And Clara's still alive. I haven't seen her now in 30 years. So at the end, for all of her anger and hatred, no, she didn't hate the Poles, Germans. For all of her anger, her last two friends were Polish.
How about you, sir? Do you consider yourself as American Jewish, Polish Jewish, or American Polish Jewish?
I'm American by citizenship. I'm an internationalist by politics. I identify deeply with the tradition of Rosa Luxemburg, who was Polish, Jewish, middle class, and a revolutionary. She was a brilliant woman. So that's my tradition. I remember my mother said she did not fault the Poles for not doing anything for the Jews. She did not. She said, I probably wouldn't. Because you understand, under the Nazi occupation, if you were found to help a Jew, they shot you dead on the spot. There's no trial. There's no jail.
Family.
Excuse me. And your family, yeah. So she didn't fault them. What she faulted, and we can obviously disagree, was that the Poles were gleeful at what was happening to the Jews. She said they would stand at the ghetto wall of Warsaw, the ghetto wall, and smile and laugh at what was being done.
Sir,
Now,
some of them. I can give you an
listen, you don't have to. You know why? You're right. She saw the ones who were smiling and laughing. She didn't see the others, you know. But I could never convince her. I understand. You don't argue with a person who's gone through that kind of experience and try to show them rationally you're wrong. No, I never tried to argue with them. Same thing with the Germans. I once asked my mother, "Did you ever meet a German who didn't like what was happening?" And she thought and she thought, and she said, "I remember one. He had a guilty look on his face." But that's because all she met were German soldiers.
But I can give you an example of my grandfather, who was arrested by the German. He was sent to the notorious Warsaw Gestapo Pawiak prison because there were two people, a woman and they were probably together, like a man, Jewish man, and a Jewish woman in our apartment in Warsaw, and they were hiding there from the Germans, and my grandfather was arrested for that. So. Big nation, different people. Some of them were good, some of them were bad.
I'm not. First of all, I don't know the history well enough, and secondly, I'm not going to pass judgment. You know, there for the grace of God go I. I don't know what I would have done in those circumstances, and I respected my parents' right to feel as they did, and I wasn't going to argue with them.